In the foggy streets of Victorian London, a sinister figure emerged that would captivate and terrify the public for generations to come. Jack the Ripper, as he came to be known, was an unidentified serial killer who stalked the impoverished areas of the East End in 1888. The Ripper's brutal murders and the failure to catch him created a legend that has cast a long shadow over our understanding of serial killers and the darker side of human nature. As we delve into this chilling tale, we'll explore not just the gruesome details of the crimes, but also the social and historical context that allowed such a figure to emerge and capture the public imagination so completely. The East End of London in the late 19th century was a world apart from the grandeur of Westminster and the West End. Overcrowding, poverty, and unsanitary conditions were rife. The influx of Irish immigrants and Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms in Eastern Europe had swelled the population of areas like Whitechapel to breaking point. By 1888, approximately 80,000 people were crammed into this small parish. The conditions were appalling. Over half of the children born in the East End died before reaching the age of 5. It was a breeding ground for crime, violence, and desperation. This was the hunting ground Jack the Ripper chose for his reign of terror. 55% of children born in the East End died before they were 5 years old. While the exact number of Jack the Ripper's victims remains a subject of debate, 5 women are generally accepted as the canonical victims. These unfortunate souls were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. All 5 were prostitutes driven to this dangerous profession by the grinding poverty of the East End. The Ripper's modus operandi was chillingly consistent. He would slit their throats before mutilating their bodies, often removing internal organs with surgical precision. This last detail led to speculation that the killer might have some medical knowledge, though this remains unproven. The first canonical victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was discovered on August 31st, 1888. Her throat had been severed by 2 cuts, and her abdomen mutilated with a deep, jagged wound. The brutality of the attack shocked even the hardened inhabitants of Whitechapel. But this was just the beginning. Over the next 10 weeks, the Ripper would strike again and again, each murder more gruesome than the last. The final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, suffered the most horrific fate. Her body was found on November the 9th, mutilated beyond recognition. The level of violence in this attack was unprecedented, suggesting that the killer had reached a frenzied state. The mutilations became increasingly severe as the series of murders proceeded, except for that of Stride, whose attacker may have been interrupted. The investigation into the Ripper murders was one of the most extensive in Victorian history. Over 2,000 people were interviewed, more than 300 were investigated, and 80 were detained. Yet despite this massive effort, the killer was never caught. The failure of the police to apprehend the Ripper led to widespread criticism and even ridicule. A famous Punch cartoon of the time depicted a blindfolded policeman surrounded by suspicious characters, perfectly capturing the public's frustration with the investigation. The case highlighted the limitations of Victorian-era policing methods and forensic science. One of the most intriguing aspects of the investigation was the use of what we might now call criminal profiling. Dr. Thomas Bond, a police surgeon, was asked to give his opinion on the killer's character and skills. His assessment, based on the nature of the crimes, is considered the earliest surviving example of offender profiling. Bond believed the killer was a man of solitary habits, subject to periodic attacks of homicidal and erotic mania. He strongly disagreed with the idea that the Ripper had any medical knowledge, contrary to popular speculation at the time. This profile, while fascinating, ultimately did little to narrow down the list of suspects. All the circumstances surrounding the murders lead me to form the opinion that the women must have been lying down when murdered, and in every case the throat was first cut. One of the most sensational aspects of the Ripper case was the series of letters purportedly written by the killer. Hundreds of such letters were received by the police and the press, but 3 in particular gained notoriety. The Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter. It was the Dear Boss letter that first used the name Jack the Ripper, a moniker that would quickly capture the public imagination and become synonymous with the killer. However, many experts now believe that most, if not all, of these letters were hoaxes, possibly written by journalists to boost newspaper sales. The most disturbing of these communications was undoubtedly the From Hell letter. This gruesome missive was sent to George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, along with half of a preserved human kidney. The letter's author claimed to have fried and ate the other half. This macabre delivery sent shockwaves through London society. The kidney was examined by Dr. Thomas Openshaw of the London Hospital, who determined it was human and from the left side, matching the organ taken from Catherine Eddowes. However, it's impossible to say with certainty whether this kidney truly came from the Ripper's victim or was part of an elaborate and twisted hoax. From Hell. Mr. Lusk, saw I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you to the piece I fried and ate, it was very knees. In the century and more since the Whitechapel murders, Jack the Ripper has become a figure of almost mythic proportions. The failure to identify the killer has led to endless speculation and conspiracy theories. Suspects have ranged from ordinary Whitechapel residents to members of the royal family. Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson, has been suggested by some as a potential suspect, as have the artist Walter Sickert and even the author Lewis Carroll. However, there's no credible evidence linking any of these individuals to the crimes. The Ripper's true identity remains as elusive today as it was in 1888. The Ripper case marked a watershed moment in the treatment of crime by journalists. It was not the first serial killer case, but it was the first to create a worldwide media frenzy. The combination of the brutal nature of the crimes, the mystery surrounding the killer's identity, and the setting of the foggy London streets created a narrative that continues to captivate the public imagination. The case has inspired countless books, films, television shows, and even video games. It's a testament to the enduring power of the Ripper legend that new theories and books about the case continue to appear with regularity, even after more than a century. Jack the Ripper was not the first serial killer, but his case was the first to create a worldwide media frenzy. While the Ripper murders were undoubtedly a tragedy for the victims and their families, they did have some positive long-term effects on British society. The case drew unprecedented attention to the dire living conditions in London's East End. The public was shocked not just by the brutality of the murders, but by the poverty and squalor in which the victims had lived. This led to increased calls for urban reform and improved living conditions for the poor. In the decades following the Ripper murders, many of the worst slums in Whitechapel were cleared and demolished, though it would be overly simplistic to attribute this solely to the Ripper case. The Ripper case also had a significant impact on the development of modern policing methods. The failure to catch the killer highlighted the limitations of Victorian-era investigative techniques and forensic science. This led to calls for reform and modernisation of police methods. In the years following the Ripper murders, we see the beginnings of more systematic approaches to crime scene investigation and the collection of evidence. While these changes can't be attributed solely to the Ripper case, it certainly played a role in highlighting the need for more advanced and scientific methods of criminal investigation. The shadow cast by Jack the Ripper thus extends far beyond the foggy streets of Whitechapel, influencing the development of modern criminology and forensic science. The Ripper murders mark an important watershed in the treatment of crime by journalists. As we conclude our exploration of the Jack the Ripper case, we're left with more questions than answers. The true identity of the killer remains as elusive today as it was over a century ago. Despite advances in forensic science and the endless speculation of amateur sleuths and professional criminologists alike, we're no closer to definitively solving the mystery. This very uncertainty is perhaps what keeps the Ripper case alive in our collective imagination. It's a puzzle that continues to fascinate and horrify in equal measure, a dark mirror reflecting our own fears and fascinations back at us. The Jack the Ripper case serves as a grim reminder of the darker aspects of human nature and the societal conditions that can breed such violence. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking in the shadows of our cities and the vulnerable members of society who often fall victim to such dangers. But it's also a story about the resilience of communities in the face of terror and the slow but steady march of social progress. The East End of London today is a far cry from the impoverished slums of 1888, though new challenges and inequalities have emerged. As we continue to grapple with issues of poverty, crime and social justice in our modern cities, the lessons of the Ripper case remain relevant. The mystery may never be solved, but its impact continues to resonate through the ages. As we've seen, the Jack the Ripper case is far more than just a series of gruesome murders. It's a window into the social conditions of Victorian London, the birth of sensationalist journalism, and the development of modern policing methods. The case continues to fascinate us not just because of its unsolved nature, but because it touches on so many aspects of human nature and society that still resonate today. The fear of the unknown, the allure of mystery, the struggle against poverty and injustice. All these themes are as relevant now as they were in 1888. In many ways, Jack the Ripper has transcended his historical context to become a cultural icon, a symbol of the shadowy killer that lurks in the dark corners of our cities and our psyches. But we must remember that behind the legend were real victims, women whose lives were cut tragically short, and whose stories are often overshadowed by the mystique surrounding their killer. As we continue to be fascinated by the Ripper case, we should also strive to understand the social conditions that made such crimes possible and work towards creating a society where all members are valued and protected. The true legacy of the Whitechapel murders should be not just an unsolved mystery, but an ongoing commitment to social justice and the protection of the vulnerable.